Does it take too much time for you to clean the data? Or you're looking for new ways to improve that process? If so, you've come to the right spot. In this small demo, I'm going to introduce you to a new tool called Power Query, with which you can manipulate, reshape, and transform data. Hi, my name is Krishna Mysore, and welcome to my channel, a place where we share tips and tricks working on data analysis within Excel and Power BI platform. Please subscribe to my channel and hit that notification bell so that you guys get to know when I do my next video. Thanks for watching.
What is Power Query? Basically, it's a data transformation tool which is embedded within Excel and Power BI platform. Initially, it was released as an Excel add-on for 2010 and Excel 2013, but subsequently, it's embedded as a native feature. It's very easy to use because it has a very powerful graphical interface editor which enables to extract, transform, and load data. Let's move on to see why we need to use Power Query, or what are the advantages of using Power Query. The first and the foremost reason why you would want to use Power Query is because of its ability to connect to multiple data sources. It allows you to connect data from within Excel through a table. It can connect to text or CSV files or through a folder. It can connect to many types of databases like Oracle database or a SQL Server database. It can connect to cloud-based Azure databases as well. And even in fact, you can get data from a web if you want to do some sort of a web scraping of data. Power Query is highly interactive. The user experience within the Power Query environment is fantastic. As you can see, it's all graphical icons, which is very easy to navigate and do any sort of transformation without having to write any functions or formulas. Thus, it's a very powerful tool which helps us to easily navigate and transform or cleanse any data we want. And finally, there are amazing features within Power Query that helps you to transform data. We can add different types of column, like custom column or conditional columns. You can duplicate a column, you can create an index column, and even you can move the order of these columns very easily by just click of the button. You can split columns by a delimiter or by position wise. In just few clicks, you're able to create or duplicate the column. Having understood the basic features of Power Query, let's jump in to see a demo of how we can leverage the features of Power Query to transform data. I'm using Microsoft Excel 2016 version for the purposes of this demo. Power Query, or as it is called Data and Transform in version 2016 onwards, can be found within the data option. If you're using earlier version, you will have an add-on as Power Query and it will show up as one of the menu at the top. Further on, I will be using two different examples to explore the features of Power Query. In the first example here, I have some transactional data about sales for a period of, say, with 852 records. And basically, this data talks about sales within United States and relates to many products that are sold. And we have some quantity data, sales and profits likewise. So let's explore how we can take this data and shape it in Power Query. You might want to use Power Query for two reasons. One, basically, if you want to do any sort of reshaping or cleaning of data, and if the manual steps takes a long time, you would opt for Power Query, because Power Query allows you to do cleaning of the data for one on a massive scale. So if you have a large amount of data and if you want to repetitively do that cleaning process, Power Query comes very handy. Number two, as I said, there's no limitation in terms of the volume of data. So generally in Excel, 1 million rows or 16,000 columns is the limitation. However, Power Query does not have that limitation. So hence we can leverage that tool to do some transformation on our data before we can use the data for further analysis. Moving on, so let's click on data here. And within the data, the first option you see is get and transform. Obviously, Power Query is not restricted to just getting and transforming data from within Excel, but it also has options to get data from many sources. So if you click on get external data here, we can see that we could get data from a database, from Access database. It can be a text file or a CSV file. You can go and even get data from a website, what we call as web scraping. You can scrape data from the web and clean it up. Or you can also click on other sort of databases like SQL Server. And also we have tables, which is basically what we'll be using today to just clean up the data which is residing in Excel itself. So here we have the table option. So from the table option, let's click on the table option, and Excel highlights the range of data we've got. So it has highlighted all the rows and columns, as you can see, and we'll say okay. So once we do that, the Power Query editor, which is the analysis engine for Power Query, it opens up. So what we see in front of us in a moment is a Power Query editor. So this is the backbone of Power Query engine. Now, once we link the data, there are you will see that the preview of the data that comes in front of you. So let me walk you through the different options in Power Query. The first and the foremost view you will see is there is a center screen or a place where you can preview the data what we have imported. And on the left hand side is the different queries that we can create, and it lists out all those queries here. So at the moment we've got table 1. Essentially we have just imported one table of data, and by default whatever the Excel table name appears, the same name gets carried over into Power Query. So we have the liberty to change the name whatever we want. So I'll go and change as sales data. Now beneath this sales data name, we have something called applied steps. So this is a preview or the navigation page which tells you, so any transformation we make to the Power Query data, those transformation gets recorded here. And on to the top, we have the basic 4 menus. First is the home page, then we have some transformation tools, then we have options to add columns, and then we have views. So let me turn on to the home option first here. So we've got the basic data here, and if you notice, for each of the field names, you will see a pre-fill of a tag of some kind. So if you look at, for example, the order date, Power Query understands this is a date field, and you can see by default it has put a calendar icon there. So if I click on that, so you see there are many options. So these options basically help us to change the data type. So if for example, if there's a text or a categorical data, then you would want to change that to a text option. Or if it is a numerical data, and if you want it as without any decimal places, you would do that choosing a whole number. And if it's a percentage data, then you would go and tag it as a percentage. Likewise, But Power Query already identifies the data type, and by default, it applies those data type features to it. And you can see that that particular step that it has applied converted the type of data in the second step here. So we didn't do any transformation yet. We just got the data, which is the source. We just imported the data, and Power Query added the next step by identifying the data type for each of the columns, which is indicated as a prerequisite. So if you look at the order ID, so the order ID is basically a text. Though you see numericals later, you see that the first two characters is a text. And Power Query understands this must be a text data, which is represented by ABC. So if you look at the text, you see the abbreviation for the text is ABC. So that's what it tells me, that order ID is a text. So if you move on for another columns, shipping mode. So we have the shipping mode here, which is a standard or a second class. So different types of shipping mode classes, and Power Query has identified that as a text. So likewise, so if we move on, say to the sales data, so you can see, since we have a decimal places here, so, and if I click on that, 1.2, so the query identifies us as a decimal places. So we will leave that as is. So in case if you want to go and change the data type, all you need to do is click on that and change the data type. So that would be your first step in transforming your data. Now, moving on, once we're happy with the type of data, let's look for some anomalies in the data. Suppose if we have some sort of errors in the data or missing values in the data, and if you want to remove that data, we could do that. So we know in the last two records, we have some missing data. If I scroll down that one way, or I could just filter down missing values. So if I click on sales, we can see all the values that are present in that column. We also see there is an option for null, because we know that last two records didn't have any sales data. So if I say select all data, but I don't want any null. So if I say disable the null option, and if I say OK, and you'll see that step being applied on the third step will be recorded for removing the null option. So if I say OK, now you'd see a third step being applied. Power Query uses its native language called M to do this transformation. For working on Power Query, you don't need to know M, but if you're interested in further transformation, advanced transformation, and would like to use the language, it is worthwhile venturing that pathway. Now, so we have removed the filter null values in the sales column, and moving on, say let's take up the other option of, say I want to delete the row ID column. So this particular column actually doesn't identify or benefit us in the data, and we want to remove this column. So all you need to do is click on that, and at the top option you have option to remove columns. And within the remove columns you have two options. Either you can remove the column you have selected, which is what we want to do, or suppose if we have many columns and you just want to retain only two columns. So in that case, you would say remove other columns. So when you click on remove other columns, what would happen is the column which you have selected, in this case, the row ID, that gets retained whilst all other columns gets removed. But if you just click the remove columns, only the column that you have selected gets removed. So in our case, we just want to remove the row ID column. So I will just say remove columns. So the moment I do that, you see that transformation gets recorded as a fourth step in here. So you can preview each of the steps right from the start. So if I click on source, that is the full information we had, and the Power Query then added up the data type and we filtered for a blank row in the sales data, and then we removed the row ID column. Then let's go and do some further transformations. So here we have in column country slash cities slash state. So basically the data has been merged here. We need to split this data into 3 different columns, basically to identify the country, the city, and the state. So each representing in the same order. So to do that, we have 2 different options to split the column. So I would highlight the column here, and there is an option called split column. So if I click on split column, we have many options to or many methods to split the column. So we could split by positions, by number of characters, or by delimiter. So I would use delimiter in our case because we have this hyphen between the 3 different words. So we have United States separated with an hyphen, and then we have the city name, and then we have an hyphen and followed by the state. So I would use a delimiter to split this column. To do that, I'll highlight that and click on split column, and I will say by delimiter. Once I do that, Power Query understands there was an hyphen in the data, or you can go and change if there was a space or a semicolon or a different type of delimiter. You can go and change that delimiter. But by default, this is fine. We've got that hyphen, and then we say we have again a further option whether you want to split only for the first with the leftmost delimiter, or do you want to separate only for the on the right hand side of the delimiter, or do you want to do for each occurrence of the delimiter? In our case, we want to split for each occurrence of the delimiter because we want United States to be residing on its own column, and then we want to have a separate column for Henderson being the city, and we want the state as well. So I would use each occurrence of the delimiter, and I say okay. So once I do that, you will see Power Query will split the columns into 3. Basically, it's split into country and followed by the city and followed by the state. Obviously, we need to go and change the header name for that. So we'll double click on that. So just double click on the field name and we'll say country, and we'll click on that to change it to city, and likewise we will rename that to state. So those 3 transformations again gets recorded here. We split the column, and once we split the column, again Power Query goes and identifies the data type, and then we rename the columns, and that gets noted as another step. Now we find that all this information is relating to United States. I don't think there's another country. So I don't want to use this column because we know that it's just United States and we don't have any other country. I want to get rid of this column. How do I do that? So just right click on the column. I will say remove, or you can just go at the top option and remove the columns. So I'll right click. I will say remove. So here we have a country, city, and the state. What else? So let's see what other options we can use Power Query for. So let's look at some of the text options, what we can do here. So say for example, I want to just change the segment into a different case. So if I click on format, I can make all this word to an uppercase. So if I click on upper, you can see the whole column is transformed with an uppercase. I'll delete that. Or you can make similar to capitalize just only each word. the first letter of the word. We can capitalize each word too. As you can see, it has done. In the home office, you can see the first word is H, and in the office, the first letter has been capitalized as well. So those are some of the formatting options you have. Moving on, we can also see what other options we can utilize in Power Query. You can replace values of a certain column, of any column you want. So if you go and say, I want to replace a word, second class with, say, something else. So we got first, same day, first class, second class, standard class. So let's say we want to call the first class as, the top class or something like that. So you can just go and change replace value, replace for what, say we'll say first class, and we'll say instead of first class we'll say premium. And if I go and say okay, you'll see that all the first class, if I just filter that, you can see the first class has just been renamed as premium. And you can see again that step has been applied here. So some of the steps when you apply, you will see an icon as a star icon. That's basically settings. If you double click on that, essentially it tells you the transformation that's been applied. So you can go and change the transformation. Then if you want to rename that to something else, you can just rename that. So those are some of the transformations you can do with the columns, the cell values, text values. Moving on, then let's see if we want to include a new column, and for your data set based on certain conditions. We could do that too. So if you look at add columns, you have several options. You can have a custom column, or you can have a conditional column, or just you want a column to just index. Basically indexes or puts a number for each record. That's an index column. So let me go and say we'll add an index column starting from 0. So basically we are saying the first record should be 0, or you can say let the index number start from 1. So if you do that, you can see we have added an index number column, and you can see starting from 1 to 0. We can also move columns or reorder these columns. Say for example, this index column, I want to move it to the first column rather than being in the last. So how do I do that? Just right click the mouse, and you got the option. You got an option here called move, and you can say move to the beginning of the table. So when you do that, it gets reordered here to the first, and that transformation again gets recorded here as reordered columns. So then if you want to have columns by example, so this is another way how we can extract values and create new columns based on the patterns. Similarly, say for example, let's look at the product ID. The product ID, of course, we have another category called furniture, office supplies, things like that. So this basically gives the category of the products, and the product ID has a prefix of the category name. So in this case, the product ID starts with FURBO, and the FUR relates to furniture category. Now, if we didn't have this column, a separate column to identify the category, and somehow we have to create that category column based on the product ID. So here we have the product ID, and we know the first 3 characters of the product ID relates to the category. And we want to create a column exactly like the one we have in the category column. Let me delete this, remove this column. Let me remove. Say our data didn't have this column to identify the category, and now I want to create the category column. How do I do that? So there are a couple of ways to do it, but the simplest way and a very powerful way of doing this is using custom column by examples or columns from examples. So in order to demonstrate that feature, let me highlight the column first. So I'm going to highlight the column, and what we want to do is extract the first three characters of the value. And if I go on column from examples and I say I've got two options, do I want to create from all the columns or from the selection? So in this case we are using just from one column, and I will say from selection. So once you do that, a new column is added, and you get a message to say start entering values, or so that I can recognize what the pattern you want. So essentially what we want to do is for the product ID, so I want to go and click on that first cell and I say FUR. When I do that and I click or enter, you can see the autofill as completed for the rest of the records. So if you look at the office, Power Query was smart enough to say, hey, look, you're getting the first three characters. Is that what you're doing? And it's going to pre-fill for the whole column. Isn't that smart? So we could, as I said, we could split the column and get and create a column for the category, or you can just use column from examples, which is the simplest one, I think, to extract the first three characters, and then I can go and rename that as category. And I say OK. So that's how we create new columns from examples. We can also go and have conditions for a column. So I want to flag something in a column, whether there is any discount or not. So here we have a column with discount. Not all products have discounts. Some have 0 and some of varying amounts. So I want to identify in my data set for each row whether there is any discount or not. So I might go and create a conditional column for that. So in the add column option, I'll click on conditional column and you get the name. So let's say discount applicable. Okay, and what we want to say is in the discount column, we'll highlight discount. If we say if the discount is 0, that's what we want to say. If there's no discount, we will say no. Else, if it has got value, then discount has been applied, then we want to say yes. So we are basically having two conditions. One, to check whether the discount record or column has got any value greater than 0 or not. If it is 0, then we say there's no discount. And if it is not, we'll say yes, discount has been applied. Mind well, we can also go and add many clauses as you want. But for the purposes of this, I will just delete that. I will just delete that and we'll say yes or no. And if I say OK, now we can see we have created a column for discount, and basically we can go and check. If it is 0, it is no, and if there was some sort of an amount of discount applied, we've got discount, it says yes. So you could, for further analysis, when we finish the query and dump the data, we can quickly analyze this data, whether discount was applied or not. We can filter the entire data set by just using these two attributes, yes or no. So I will pause for this example, and let's move on to say how we will wrap up the query. So this is the entire query right from the start. We sourced the data, we made the transformation, and it's all ready. And then we're going to say go and close and load. We have got close and load, and we have got close and load too. So the first time when you're going to close and load to, we have many options. So if I click on close and load to, it will give you options whether you want to load the transform data into a table, or you just want to keep it as a temporary storage holder without showing that anywhere in your workbook, which is only create connection. So in that case, let us see the transform table. So I'll say table, and I will say in a new worksheet. And when I say load, that query gets completed and it gets loaded onto a new sheet within the workbook. So you can see on the right hand side, there's a workbook query. It's transforming the data. It said 851 rows loaded, and you can see within the new sheet, the transformed data appears here. So this is how you use Power Query Editor to transform your data, and you can see the additional column of the discount that's applied. You can see the 3 different columns we created for the country, city, and state. Obviously, we removed the country column. This query is all set for you to refresh. So whenever a new data comes in within your example 1 sheet here, suppose if the data grows, all you need to do, you don't have to repeat that process. All you need to do is on this table, right click, and if you say refresh, the new data gets loaded into Power Query, apply the transformations that we have done so far, and it refreshes back with a new data set. So that's example 1. Now let us move to the example 2, where I show you a few more features from the Power Query. So in this example, say you have a data set like this, some sort of sales data that comes through, and the data has been laid out by months in the rows and by years in the column. So you have 2 years of data, so 2019 and 20, and this data, assume it keeps growing as you get a new set of data set. Now we want to, if we want to make a total from here, I might as well have a separate column, a function, a sum function to total this column, and then you need to have another column, another function to sum up column E, and then you can get the total together. So this is a very simple example, but you can think about the use cases, many use cases, how it helps you to retransform or reshape the data. So here I have again the same process. I want to basically, what I want to do is I want to have a single column for the year or the amount, and stack up the column of 2020 under within the same column as D. So basically I want to bring this data into this column like that, and also have the January and December repeated here, and also we need, since it's in one column, we need the year as well in another column. So basically we need to transform the data set. So I'll undo that. So to do that, again, I will highlight the data set where I go to data, from table, I'll click on that. So Excel identifies the data range, and it's got, say, let us say in this case, I deliberately won't say my table has readers. I won't check that in, and let's see what happens. And I say, okay. Once we do that, you can see we don't have any column. So Power Query did not have any column headers because we explicitly said our data does not have any headers. So the first row, the year 2019 and 20 appears as a record, but basically we want this record, it's not a record, it's a header for us. So we want to rename that as reshape it rather as a field name. So how do I do that? So very simple. So if we go to the transform, we have an option called use first row as headers. So if I just do that, if I click on that, it gives me use first. There's 2 options. Use headers as first row, which is not what we want. We want the first row as headers. So because it has turned as a record, if I click on use first row as headers, you can see the 2019 and 20 has moved up, and that transformation has been created here as promoted headers. And again, Power Query identifies the data type and it puts in as a number, because 2019, 2020 is a year, and basically the column as sales data, which is number, and it identifies as a number which we want. In case of the month, we've got January, February. It's just as a text. It's not formatted as a date. It's just a text, and Power Query identifies that as a text data. So let me go and rename that as month. So moving on, what we want to do is we want to line up the 2020 column under the 2019. Essentially, we want to have one column for the amount, we want to have one column for the month, and we want another column to indicate what year it is. So how do we do that? Very simple. So if we click on the column month, which I think I've already highlighted, let me click on that. And we've used a feature called pivot. So if you see here under the column options, we have pivot columns. So instead of pivot, what we would do is we would unpivot. So if I say right click on the selected month, and what I want to do is I want to unpivot the columns. And which column do I want to unpivot? I don't want to unpivot the month column, but I would be unpivoting the columns which the 2019 and 20. These are the columns which I want to stack up into one column. So I will go here on the month and I'll say unpivot other columns. So the moment I do that, you can see all the values, the two columns are stacked up one after the other, and you've got the months repeated for each of the years, and you've got the years as a separate column. So there's another way of doing that as well. So if I will undo this, so instead of highlighting the month, I can highlight the two columns and then say pivot these columns. So unpivot the columns I've highlighted. So essentially it's the same thing. So either you can select and the columns you want to unpivot, or you can select one column, because if you have many columns to unpivot, you don't want to keep selecting all those columns. So you would rather select the columns you want to keep unchanged, and you'll say unpivot other columns. And same thing goes even for removing other columns. Suppose if you have 40 different columns you want to remove, you just want to keep one column. You don't want to highlight all those columns. I would say just highlight the column I want, and I'll say remove all other columns. So when I do that, all other column gets removed. Of course, I don't want to do that here, so I will just undo that. And here we have a data set which has got one column for the values and a column which identifies the year. So we're going to go and change that, rename it to year. And then we have the month, and we can go and save and load the query. Again, close and load the query. Let's say we want to create as a table, again in a new data set. So for us to compare, I will just show you, let me keep it in the existing sheet, and I will show the existing sheet, and I will highlight where I want to place that. I say okay. I say load. So when I load that, you can see Power Query loaded 24 rows of data records, and you can see how our data has transformed into another data set with has reshaped the data set into a single column. So I hope this small snippet of Power Query was helpful to get you started, or has given a fundamental idea of how Power Query works. In future sessions, I will continue to explore and demonstrate other powerful features that can be applied on the data transformation using Power Query. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.